Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Almassian. I apologize if the countdown video stopped working. It should have been 3 minutes, but here we are at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Thank you very much for tuning into Syriana Analysis. Thank you very much for all your hellos and salam alaikums from all around the world. I wanted to speak in this video about how Israel is probably dragging the United States to a regional war with global ramifications. And for that, I'm going to host a friend and a colleague, Thomas Fazi. He's going to join me in 30 minutes in order to discuss this case from Italy. He recently, or yesterday, he published an article on Unheard on this exact topic. So I think he's the best person to speak about this case as he is already addressing this important issue. Before that, journalism and journalists are very, very important things in nowadays international conflicts and how the people receive the information and the perception they form about different topics. I've been working in this field. I started working in this field actually in 2012. I was a junior journalist. I started as a producer, and then I developed some of my skills. I started also becoming an anchor and the medi moderator between different guests. But most of my experience and expertise I gained thanks to my personal work on Syriana analysis and standing in front of the camera and speaking to you and trying to analyze the different cases around the world. Now, why I say that the field of journalism is very, very important, because the job of the journalists are to first investigate the events, to come to conclusions, to criticize the government, to monitor the work of the government, or to monitor and police the work of the influential people in the country, whether they are state actors or non state actors. So in modern times, we call them the fourth authority after the judicial, after the executive, and after the legislative powers. We call them the fourth power or the fourth authority because they are able to influence how the society operates and how the people see and perceive different conflicts, whether it's domestic or it's exterior. And that's why we can see that increasing number of people with special interests are embedding themselves with media outlets, with social media outlets, and funding different outlets, not only governments, but also non state actors. For example, we have Bill Gates, we have billionaires all around the world are financing different media outlets because they want to shape the perception. It's not a coincidence that after the pandemic in 2020, Bill Gates spent tens of millions financing, for example, different journalists around the world and different media outlets because he wanted to shape the perception. He wanted to shape the public opinion. And that's how much media and journalism is important. But on one hand, you can have an honest journalism and dishonest journalism with integrity, those who are trying to police the people who have a special interests, and those interests do not align with the interests of the people. And you have dishonest journalism and dishonest journalists who embed themselves with these people who are in positions of power, whether in the state or outside the state. And now some people would say, why would they be so dishonest? Why would they not be they follow their conscience, for example? Very easy. I will give you a very simple example, guys. I come from Syria, right? And I moved to Germany in late 2015. My colleagues, my friends from the same university that we sat together in the same faculty, in the same university, they also moved in Germany during similar times. And after some time, they have joined political parties, for example, like the Green Party and other parties, and they all of a sudden became active politically. They have their own scholarships, their job opportunities. Their faces are printed on magazines. They are invited to big events. They're shaking hands with politicians. They shook hands with the chancellor, the foreign minister, the president. So what they do is basically they pump up your ego, and they basically also they give you opportunities, job opportunities. They give you scholarships, etc., etc. When I moved in Germany in late 2015, in the first quarter of 2016, I applied for a scholarship to continue my studies, master in media studies, right? And when I applied to the scholarship, I received a quick answer with a the answer. If I show you, which one day I will show the public, they were very impressed with my credentials. They were very impressed with my knowledge and they with my CV, and they wanted to do an interview with me. And the interview was on a phone. So the interview lasted around 30 minutes, and they were very, very impressed. And I personally got the impression from the people who were interviewing me that they were very impressed, very happy. It was positive and everything. And I got the impression that I will get the scholarship. And they told me just wait for the final answer from us in a couple of weeks. So I waited for the answer for a couple of weeks, and in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I received an answer that unfortunately, due to there is a high competition with other candidates, da 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 da. So we couldn't pick you. We picked someone else who has higher experience, better experience, etc. Okay, fine. And few months later of this experience, I was contacted by a friend. She's a woman, and she was asking me some political and journalistic questions. And I was like, asked her, "What are you doing now?" And she said, "I'm doing master in media studies." I was like, "Wow, where are you doing this media master in media studies?" She said, "In this place." And I was like, "Hmm, did you receive a scholarship?" She said, "Yes." And I was like, "Okay, what is your background in journalism?" She said, my background is translator. I'm not. I haven't studied journalism. I don't have any experience in journalism. But despite that, she received the scholarship. And when I started asking more questions, she received the scholarship, and four other people received the scholarship. And all of them, the five of them uh, who have been chosen by this institution or place in Germany to get this scholarship, all of them, they have zero experience in journalism. They have zero published articles. They have zero media appearance. They have been never been a moderator. They have never been an online journalist or anything. Right? Back then, I've had so many published opinion articles in very good newspapers in Lebanon. I've had articles published in research journals. I've had my personal experience in TV appearances and so many other things. And despite that, I didn't receive because they can Google you, they can search for your social media outlets. So politically, you do not fit in this criteria. Why I'm giving you this example? Because I want to tell you that the job of the journalist is very important, and they want to pick the right person to give this scholarship because they're investing in this person, and in the future they want for this person to become in a position that this person can serve the establishment, the narratives that they are pushing upon the people. I'm a stubborn person. I'm not an easy person, so they don't want any troubles. Why would they finance and spend so much money on someone, give him a scholarship, and then this someone becomes, God forbidden, a real journalist, and he is asking questions and he's policing the authority, etc., etc. And nowadays, in the case of the Palestine, Israel, and before that in Ukraine, and before that in Syria, and before that in Libya, and before that in Lebanon, and before that in Iraq, real journalists were many, and they played a very important role in shaping the public opinion. However, because the mainstream media is too strong and the finances and the funding of these established media outlets are very big, and they're coming, these media outlets do not produce something that they can sell, so they cannot finance themselves. So they need advertisements and they need rich people to finance it. And most of these rich people, they have interests, right? And most of these people with special interests, they interests also align with the state interests. They have their contacts in the state, and they want to pursue certain policies that also can suit their financial interests, and they can fill their pockets, etc., etc. Therefore, all in all, you can find good journalists in the mainstream media, but the establishment itself is very corrupted because there is political money in it. And nowadays we can see these things in the Palestine Israel case. And because of that, many of the journalists are being targeted by the Israeli side, because it's very important for Israel to sideline many of the voices who are speaking or they're voicing alarms about the crimes committed by the Israeli side. Because it's also an information warfare, right? So this is Israeli. This is from the Washington Post. Israeli strikes in Lebanon killed two journalists. In the past video, I mentioned that Israel killed two Al Mayadeen journalists in southern Lebanon, and now this is being verified by the Washington Post. And the Washington Post says, I will tell you what they say here. The death of two journalists working for the Beirut-based Al Mayadeen TV channel brought to three the number of journalists killed in Lebanon in the cross-border exchanges, raising concerns in Lebanon that Israel might be targeting journalists. Al Mayadeen identified them as reporter Farah Omar and cameraman Rabia Ma'mari, and said a civilian who was accompanying them was also killed when an Israeli warplane fired two missiles at their camera position. An 80-year-old woman was killed earlier in the day in an Israeli airstrike against a border town, Lebanon's national news agency said. Lebanese Prime Minister Najib Mikati, by the way, he is not a pro Hezbollah guy, he accused Israel of deliberately targeting the journalists. He said, quote, its goal is to silence the media that exposes its crimes and attacks. Israel didn't respond to the allegations, but said its aircraft had been operating in the area against what a statement from the Israeli Defense Forces called terrorist cells. An investigation by the French organization Reporters Without Borders into the killing in October of a Reuters cameraman. This is a previous case, guys. I also covered this case, and I said that Israel also murdered Hissam Abdullah. He was again the cameraman of Reuters. That even Reuters itself didn't dare to mention that Israel killed him. Imagine that. So Reporters Without Borders they did an investigation into the killing of Hissam Abdullah, and they concluded that Abdullah and his co-workers, several of whom were injured, were explicitly targeted. And they said there was no Hezbollah fire coming from the area at the time, and the group of journalists had clearly identified themselves as press, the organization said. Israel has said it was very sorry for Abdullah's death, but has not publicly acknowledged responsibility. Yeah, of course. And this is the investigation I just want to share with you, that so that you also know that sorry, um, what are we speaking about? This is the journalist of Reuters, and he was murdered, as I said, by the Israeli bombing of southern Lebanon. And they were standing in a place; it was a very open place, and there was no Hezbollah presence there. And they had their badges and they on their cars and everything. So Reporters Without Borders has released a video reconstruction of the tragedy that resulted in the death of one journalist and the injury of several others. The initial findings of the investigation show that the reporters were not collateral victims of the shooting. One of their vehicles marked press was targeted, and it was also clear that the group stationed next to it was journalists. So I don't think there is still any doubt that the Israeli side has killed this journalist deliberately, and they're sending a message to the people who are trying to cover the war from southern Lebanon or from anywhere about this war, that their presence there is unwelcomed, and their coverage of the war is unwelcomed, because they may also show the other side of the story of this conflict, right? Something that they want to um, hide from the other people. This is very interesting. This investigation is coming at this time, and I have watched the entire video, and they are clearly showing different angles of the video with satellite imagery, and all the indications, the time frames of the attack, and the angle of the attack from where it's coming is quite obvious, that from the Israeli side, including the type of the weapon that has targeted these journalists. Now, since we're speaking about the journalists, this is the investigation. I will post it in the chat if you guys want to read it separately. I will jump to another, because since we're speaking about journalism and journalists, this is coming from the BBC, guys. The BBC journalists are not apparently very happy with the coverage of their own channel. It seems there are people. Look, I know a person who used to work for the BBC, and he resigned, and this was a year or 1.5 years ago, because of the coverage of the BBC on certain issues, and he was very unhappy with the BBC's bias. And this is coming again from BBC, and the BBC journalists are unhappy with the coverage of the Gaza Strip war. They say, as Israel pounds Gaza, BBC journalists accuse broadcaster of bias. The BBC has been accused by its journalists of failing to tell the story of the Israel Palestine conflict accurately, investing greater effort in humanizing Israeli victims compared with Palestinians, and omitting key historical context in coverage. In in a 2,300 word letter written to Al Jazeera by 8 UK based journalists employed by the corporation, the BBC is also said to be guilty of a double standard in how civilians are seen, given that it is unflinching in its reporting of alleged war crimes in Ukraine. They sent Al Jazeera the letter as a humanitarian disaster in Gaza escalates, and as grim milestones are reached at pace. At the time of writing, more than 14,500 Palestinians have been reported as killed by Israeli bombardment, including at least 6,000 children. Guys, um, the number is 14,500, 10,000 of which 10,000 of them are children and women, just for you to know. The BBC has failed to accurately tell this story through omission and lack of critical engagement with Israel's claims, and it has therefore failed to help the public engage with and understand the human rights abuses unfolding in Gaza, the letter reads. Thousands of Palestinians have been killed since October 7. When will the number high enough for our editorial stance to change? I mean, this question is not should not only be posed to the BBC, but other media outlets as well and politicians as well, right? I think we have reached into the point where uh, the numbers have become too high, and the journalists and the politicians are um, like they're hiding behind this narrative that they established about this war, but at the same time the realities and the numbers and the facts and the statistics coming from the Gaza Strip just speaks volume and speaks like just the other, like it's just the opposite of what they're claiming about Israel, right? The war has also divided newsrooms globally, with disagreements over how each side is being portrayed, the allegedly unequal level of empathy shown to Israeli and Palestinian victims, and the use of language. And I will show you examples now, guys. The BBC journalists said that across British Broadcasting Corporation BBC platforms, terms like, quote, massacre and, quote, atrocity have been reserved, quote, only for Hamas, framing the group as the only instigator and perpetrator of violence in the region. This is inaccurate but aligns with the BBC's overall coverage. The Hamas, while, quote, appalling and devastating, the Hamas assault, while, quote, appalling and devastating, doesn't justify the indiscriminate killing of thousands of Palestinian civilians, and the BBC cannot be seen to support or fail to interrogate the logic that it does, the letter reads. So they couldn't send this letter to the BBC because they will not be heard. They send it to Al Jazeera English, and Al Jazeera English because they are pro-Palestinian in this case, so they're showing it to the public because they want also to hit the reputation of the BBC. I mean, you know, probably my opinion about the Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is also very biased outlet. It's owned by the Qatari regime, and I'm not a fan of Al Jazeera, right? And I'm not a fan of any media outlet that is owned in part or in whole by governments or government funding or people, billionaires, for example, like Bill Gates or any other oligarchs. That's why I have my own TV channel. Alhamdulillah, as we say in Arabic. I don't want to be uh, part of shaping the public opinion in a way that can serve a very tiny elites instead of serving the public interest. This is the BBC presenter, guys, just after the announcement of the truce between Israel and Hamas. And she is describing the prisoners and the hostages who will be released from Israeli jails. Because, as you may know, guys, there are hundreds of hostages in the Israeli jails. The numbers are around 5,000, and many of them are children. And the BBC correspondent here in Jerusalem, she describes the Palestinian children to be released from Israeli occupation dungeons as teenage males. Take a look.
Now, during this time period, we're expecting to have batches of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. They are women and also teenage males, according to a list that's been put out of some 300 names. Now, during this time period, we're expecting to have batches of Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. They are women and also teenage males, according to a list that's been put out of some 300.
So I think this language is not a coincidence, right? And also because Israeli side is claiming a moral high ground, right, over Hamas, and they're saying, oh, they kidnapped children, they kidnapped women, and that's correct, and we should condemn that, and I condemn that. Children and women they shouldn't come in crossfire, they shouldn't be kidnapped, they shouldn't be hostages by any side, right? If you want to hold hostage someone, only the combatants, and they should be treated as prisoners of war when you're at war with your enemy. But children and women, I'm against that. So I also condemn that for sure. But since Israel is pointing finger to Hamas and says you are a terrorist group because you're kidnapping children and women, the other side would also say you're also kidnapping women and children. You have no jurisdiction over the West Bank or East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip, and you have kidnapped so many people from these territories and you took them to your jails, right? This is another example, for example, from the BBC, when they Intel Sky, they say observing the nuances in media language can reveal underlying biases. One recent example from the BBC: Israelis killed while Palestinians simply died. Such discrepancies in wording don't go unnoticed and serve as a reminder to always question the narratives presented to us. This is it's just in the one tweet, you know. More than 500 people have died in Gaza after Israel launched massive retaliatory airstrikes, and more than 700 people have been killed in Israel since Hamas launched its attack on Saturday. This was at the beginning of the conflict. Another, I think, example is worth noting here, and this is also coming, by the way, from the BBC, but this time this wasn't after the 7th of October. This was, I think, in 2019, right? 2018, actually. Check what they say: 41 Palestinians murdered and 2,000 injured by Israel, and BBC lead with headlines: dozens die. Not killed, not murdered. No, they just died, according to BBC. If they won't say it will, Israel is guilty. Anyway, so dozens die as the US opens Jerusalem embassy. It's like these people were running and then they were hit by a meteor, or aliens came, or what happened? Pandemic, booster, what happened to them, right? It's crazy here how the wording. This was from 2018. And lastly, I will show you last one before we are joined with Thomas. This is not from the BBC. This is from the Sky News. And this was on October 21st of 2023. And it says it has been 2 weeks since Hamas first launched its attack on Israel that saw 1,400 people were killed. Since then, Palestinian officials say that more than 4,000 people have died in Gaza. Check.
Now, it has been 2 weeks since Hamas first launched its attack on Israel. It saw 1,400 people killed. Since then, Palestinian officials say that more than 4,000 people have died in Gaza. Reporting on the war has been personal for Palestinian journalist and human rights advocate Yara Eid, who joins me now. Yara, thank you for joining us here on Sky News. I understand that recent events have caused you personally a great deal of grief and pain.
Well, I lost more than 30 members of my immediate family.
This woman has lost 13 members of her immediate family, and she's saying died, right? This is the example that I wanted to show you. I don't want to continue with this in length, but you get the point, right? The wording creates perception, it creates narrative, and it shapes the public opinion. Now that we are joined by Thomas, I would like to jump him into this discussion. Thomas, thank you very much for being my guest today.
Hi, Kavok. It's a pleasure. Nice to be here again.
It's a really pleasure to be with you. You recently published a very good article on the Unheard. I was going through, I was reading it today, and I'm covering this case extensively on Syriana Analysis, especially that the potentials of the expansion of the war in the region, and I think it's very important for us to discuss. But before that, Thomas, am I correct? You're Italian, right?
Yes, half Italian, half English. Yes.
Cool. I'm asking this question to my guests before I start the conversation. It's the question here would be why you personally, you're not directly related to the Middle East, for example, interested in the Palestinian case, and you're trying to present a different opinion or presenting arguments that are critical to the Israeli side. Why do you think? Why this motivates you, what is happening in the Middle East, to write and be active on this case?
Well, first of all, I mean, Palestine has, I mean, especially as someone who started out as a left-wing activist more than 20 years ago, Palestine has always been very much present in my mind, and I would say in the collective consciousness of the left. And I think that explains, this outpouring of support, and left, with which I have a lot of disagreements. But if we want to understand why, there's been such such support for Palestine, and such such a strong reaction to what's happening in Gaza isn't just, of course, the scale of the atrocities, which are off the scale, I would say, if you'll excuse the pun. But of course, it also relates to the fact that maybe people that don't have this history of activism on the left, I would say probably aren't really even aware of what the reality is and has been for Palestinians for decades.
Yes.
I've been, I've been, I couldn't even recount all the demonstrations that I've been on, for Palestine in reaction to some massacre, to some killing, to something that Israel had done. Even if we just limit ourselves to Gaza, there have been almost a dozen heavy bombing campaigns by Israel just in the past 15 years. And that's not even considering the kind of wider reality of the occupation and apartheid regime. And so, so I think we, a lot of us feel a profound connection with Palestine, which in a way has also become symbolic of the reality that certain populations, certain peoples live around the world. So Palestine, in a way, is a symbol of the profound injustices that exist in the world. And and aside from all that, I think it's simply impossible to, for anyone following current affairs, it's almost impossible not to think about what's happening in Gaza. You would literally have to shut yourself in a room without an internet connection, in order not to. Honestly, I think for a lot of us, it's even hard for us just to go on about our lives.
Yes, that's very true.
I think it's I find myself kind of obsessively reading what is happening in Gaza, and almost having a hard time really focusing on almost anything else, because what is happening is really something that we haven't seen, something that's on a scale that we really haven't seen in a very, very long time. This is not to say that, of course, there haven't been other wars. There aren't, even today, other wars with a high number of casualties. But there's something uniquely, atrocious, I think, about what's happening in Gaza, and it has to do, I would say, yes, with the scale relative of the destruction and the death, relative to the the size of the territory, and relative to the size of the population. This is something on a scale that I think we really haven't seen in a very, very long time, and it's happening basically in real time, in front of the whole world's eyes.
Thomas, you raised very important points here, and to be honest with you, sometimes I personally feel guilty if I continue with my life as normal as it was before October 7, although this has been going on for quite a long time, but because the bloodshed is ongoing and it never stops. And every time to be honest, every time I log into Twitter, and the first thing I see is a little girl with a smashed hair, and the limbs are broken, and all this footage that comes from it leaves no room for anyone to have an excuse to not care about this issue. And in my opinion, the people who left, not on the left, but the people who are still not speaking about this case, they are probably ideologically driven. especially when it comes to people on the right. But on the left, as you mentioned, I'm very, I feel like I'm impressed, and I am, I have probably been very harsh in my criticism to the left in the past few years, which I felt like they lost the path.
Me too.
And yeah, and that's why I've been called a right winger for criticizing the left, right, in this in this regard. But you published this article recently. I will just show you guys the screenshot of the article, and the link is, guys, in the description below, and also the account of Thomas on X is also in the description below for you to check. And the article goes by: Israel's ceasefire conceals a bigger threat. America is being dragged into a global war. I think you said here, despite the truce between Hamas and Israel, you're concerned of a regional war and American involvement into global war. What are the grounds that you stand on to make this argument that despite the truce between Hamas and Israel, there is still a possibility and potential regional war with global ramifications here?
Well, first of all, Israel itself has said that the war is gonna, the war is ongoing, and it's going to be a long war, and that the war is gonna, and that the military activities are gonna recommence after the 4-day truce. So we have, the Israeli government telling us that the war is going to continue, and in fact, might even escalate in terms of ground operations. What Israel has announced is effectively that they want to move the operations towards the south. So after having destroyed most of northern Gaza and telling all the inhabitants of North Gaza to move south, now they've started, the mass bombardment of southern Gaza, and we might even see an intensification of ground operations moving south, which would of course involve massive casualties. So I mean, that's an absolutely tragic prospect, and that's why it's so hard to keep the global movement for to put an end to this war going. And in terms of the regional implications, well, I would say that this is not a risk. This is already happening. In the article, I speak of a low intensity proxy war between Israel and the US on one side, and Iran and its proxies on the other. Sorry, my daughter just came in. Puoi aspettare 10 minuti che finisco? Dai, lascia la porta aperta. Ora tra poco arriva la mamma, però sto al telefono, guarda, non posso parlare. Sorry about
God
that.
bless you.
I thought my wife was going to be here, and instead she left me with a kid. Amore, adesso arrivo. Sorry about that.
No worries.
And can you just give me 1 second?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Take your time. This was So this reminds me of this incident, I think, on the BBC, when the daughter came also in the room when he was speaking to the BBC about a North Korean case, and then the wife comes and then drags the baby from the room, and all of them, the baby and the woman and everyone falls on the ground. Yeah, he's back. I will add to the stage. Hi, Thomas.
Sorry about that.
No worries. It reminded me of the BBC interview when the daughter comes inside when he was speaking about North Korea.
That's a classic. Yeah, and the maid comes in. Yeah, drag the baby out. Yeah, I don't have a maid, unfortunately. It's just me and the baby. So no, I was saying in terms of the regional implications, I say we're already witnessing a low-intensity proxy war between Iran and between Israel and the US on one side, and Iran and its proxies on the other. Iran and the so-called axis of resistance. For now, for most of the past month, it's been I would say it's a proxy, fairly low intensity, proxy war, but nonetheless, I would say a proxy war, where I would say all sides have been quite careful to manage the risk of escalation. I would say a lot of it has been, for show in a way, especially when it comes to Iran's proxies, Hezbollah, and even the Houthis in Yemen. I would say it was important for these movements to show support for Palestine, for Gaza. And of course, the same goes for Iran itself. But of course, Iran, as Israel itself, I would imagine and hope,
yes,
none of the major actors involved, and of course the US as well. No one wants this to escalate into a major regional all-out war for obvious reasons. But at the same time, it is a low intensity warfare. I mean, there have been daily exchanges of fire on the Israel-Lebanon border. There've been several long-range drone attacks and missile attacks from Yemen towards Israeli targets, which have been intercepted. But I mean, let's not. These are not. This is not a bunch of goat herders, as some people think. When they hear about Yemenite rebels. I mean, this is it's a Syrian army that controls most of the country. Which has very sophisticated weapons, long-range ballistic and cruise missiles, which are capable of striking not just Israeli targets, and of course US targets in the region. So this is a war which already directly involves the US as well. There have been around 60 attacks on US targets in the region since the start of the hostilities in Gaza, in mostly Iraq and Syria. And there's been retaliation as well from by the US forces on Iran-linked militias in Iraq and Syria. So we have these tit for tat exchanges, which everyone is trying. I think everyone has been trying to manage in order to avoid the situation spiraling out of control. But of course, that risk is always there, and I think the most unpredictable element are the Houthis themselves.
Why do you think the Houthis
which
are
have, in fact,
unpredictable?
I would say, escalated quite heavily with the seizing of the Israeli ship, of the Israel-linked ship in the Red Sea. I think that marks an important escalation. Even though Israel's very cool reaction shows that Israel itself, at the moment, is not interested in escalating the situation, in retaliating heavily against the Yemenite group. We've seen an incredibly measured response, but from Israel, even saying, "Oh, it's not an Israeli ship, so it's got nothing to do with us." Well, of course, it is a ship that is linked to Israel in many ways, without going into it. And of course, it does signal an important increase in the risk for all Israeli ships, going up and down this crucial global shipping route. But you get the impression that everyone is trying to avoid this escalating into a major war. But nonetheless, it's a major war. It's a war that at a low intensity level is already happening. And of course, these things they also take, they have their own kind of path dependencies, and so they can tend to escalate, regardless of the intentions of the individual actors involved. So I think it's a very serious risk, and it's one that the US is clearly very concerned about. We know from reports in the US press that the US Defense Secretary has expressed serious concern to his counterpart in Israel, especially concerning the risk of of Israel escalating the situation on the Lebanese border. This, following the attack on the journalists, which you were talking about earlier, and other actions that Israel has conducted on the border. So the U.S. is, very concerned. Not so much, the U.S. almost seems more concerned that it might be Israel initiating the escalation rather than Iran. Iran has made it very clear that it doesn't want to directly, join the conflict, and I think we have no reason not to believe that's true, because clearly
Yes.
Iran is benefiting from the current status quo, from the current post-October 7th status quo, and it has no interest in completely upending that status quo by, triggering an all-out war with the US, which I don't think it wants. But this, but we'll see a continuation of these of this proxy confrontation, and I think that's. But it is a risk. I think it's a very serious risk, and it's a risk that the US is clearly taking very seriously. And I would say more in general, the US seems quite concerned by the complete unpredictability of the Netanyahu government. I think,
and it could go either way. It could go either way. Even one miscalculation may lead into escalation in the region. It doesn't have to be planned to get escalated. This is there are so many examples in the past that human mistake can lead into major wars. One of the commentators was just telling me maybe they were the journalists who were targeted recently. I think the question was about the Mayadeen journalists, that they detected their this was it. Journalists are targeted from Israel, tracking their phones, right? So I did my investigation on this, guys, and I checked the photos of the journalist that she recently got murdered on the borders, and she had her iWatch, the smart watch. And I asked some of my colleagues who knew her personally in Beirut. They do not think that this is the case, that she was detected via the GPS, because she was standing in a very open place for several days in the same location, in the same spot. So the Israelis, they already had reconnaissance UAVs checking what's happening there, and accordingly they hit it. But it's very, very possible in the future for things like this to happen, because I was checking that there is a report investigation how the CIA, for example, operatives, they banned of wearing the smartwatches, because it's very easy to break into the smartwatches. And there are some of the softwares that are fitness softwares, by the way, guys, and those are spying softwares. And what happened is, in Syria, I have read about this. In Syria, they found the location of very sensitive military places, because they found some of the officers or some of the important people, they were wearing these smartwatches, and they were able to detect the exact location of these people and hit them in Syria. And this has happened by the CIA, by the United States.
I think I also saw some leaked images of the actual of the routes that of the running routes that these soldiers would take and would do, of the morning runs, basically. So I think they were leaked on the internet some years back, and I think and they were saying that that's how they identified the presence of US soldiers where they weren't supposed to be, and they actually even leaked the photos of the paths that they would it was mostly the circular paths that they would run run in the morning. I think from their Fitbits, the fitness. The fitness app.
Watch.
I don't know. Did you see have you read the investigation by Reporters Without Borders? I don't know if you mentioned it earlier.
I was just mentioning that, and they had their geolocation and the direction that the missile came, and the amount of TNT and the type of the TNT that was used. It all concludes that Israel deliberately targeted these journalists. And this was the Reuters.
Clearly, journalists are a target in this war. I think this has been the highest, the war that has seen the highest number of journalist casualties in such a short time. And and again, I think this is not accidental. Israel wants as few eyes on the ground as possible, but of course it seems like Israel is stuck in the past century in terms of you can target all the journalists you want, but you can try to take away the internet, which they did for a while. But in this day and age, everyone has a smartphone, and it's simply impossible to conceal from the world what's happening in Gaza. So it's been really interesting also to watch just how the extent to which Israel has completely fumbled its propaganda. We always hear about how the Israeli intelligence agencies are the most advanced, the best in the world. And I think what we've seen is some of the kind of crudest, worst, lamest propaganda that you could possibly imagine, almost like fake Iraqi incubators, from the first Gulf War style propaganda. And of course, that was, that could fly in the 90s when all you had was CNN, But I mean, it's like they are applying that kind of 90s propaganda to an age where all it takes is a bunch of kids on the internet to expose a fake video, or I mean, it's just been really astonishing. And that's not even considering how open they've been about their genocidal aims. I mean, that's also another very unique aspect of this war. Why are people so concerned that what is happening in Gaza? Why do people think that it looks very much like a genocide? First of all, the scale and the extent of the destruction. Not to mention the fact that several UN experts and scholars have called it a genocide in the making, i.e., the deliberate targeting, the deliberate destruction of a people, a part of a people at least. But the Israelis themselves have been very open that this is their aim. I mean, they've openly spoken about destroying, razing to the ground, annihilating, nuking Gaza. And there have been countless, they've said countless times that their ultimate aim is to drive all the Gazans out. I mean, they've said it. We have high-level Israeli officials, government officials, that have gone on record saying, "Yeah, this is what we want to do. We want to drive them all out." Which again is, usually, in a war, you're not really supposed to say that. I mean, I think they haven't really learned much from the Americans in terms of how you try to whitewash your crimes during a war. That's what the Americans have always been quite good at, just whitewashing their crimes. Instead, Israel seems totally happy just declaring their intentions, their genocidal intentions, and there's no doubt that what they are talking about is genocide. Now, one can debate from a technical legal standpoint if what is actually happening on the ground can be defined as genocide, and there's an ongoing debate about that. And the simple fact that we're having that debate, I think, is shocking in itself. The fact that we're having a debate of whether Israel is actually engaged in a genocide or not, but the genocidal intent of the Israeli leadership is beyond doubt, and that's also been shocking to watch. Also, in terms of Israel's own interests, I mean, there almost seems to be a level of disassociation from reality, as if they really don't understand the impact that not just their actions but their words have on the world. Almost a form of collective autism. And I don't know if it has to do with the victim complex that the Israeli leadership has always been very effective at exploiting. Maybe they thought that they could, that they could keep that would sustain them, whatever, which is what has been the reality for a very long time. But I think that what we're witnessing is that that narrative ploy has completely broken down in the face of what is happening in Gaza, and they really don't seem to be cognizant of the effect that what they're saying and what they're doing in Gaza is having. And Israel, I can't see how Israel will ever recover from
This is a really important question. Can they really recover from this? Like at the current moment in the era of digital media and the people are documenting everything at the moment, I can see that the people even here in Germany who were, of course, they condemned Hamas and rightfully so at so many cases, but at the same time, they cannot tolerate this, what they call this self-defense by completely carpet bombing half the city and killing the numbers are horrifying. 14,500 people in 1 month. The 10,000 of them are children and women. I mean, what are you doing here? And then you come to justify all these crimes. You cannot do that in this era. And when you mentioned this amateur level of propaganda, to be honest with you, I have given them so much credit in the past. I have overestimated their skills in propaganda. But now, I feel like even Saddam Hussein's Minister of Information used to do better propaganda than the Israelis. It's so clear.
Absolutely, it's been really shocking, and I think part of it has to do with a long-standing tradition of Israel essentially grounding its security policy around showing the world how scary they are. This has been, kind of a semi-official policy. They've always gone out of their way with, even rather extreme actions, such as the attack on the Turkish boat some years back, and other, and of course that. So they've always had this very aggressive narrative, but I think they've, this time they've gone completely off the chart, and I think that they're not instilling fear in people anymore. They're instilling horror and I would say hatred in large, of course, not just the Middle Eastern, not just in the Middle Eastern countries, but in the world more in general. So this will really come back to I think haunt Israel for a very long time. I don't see how do you recover from this exactly in this day and age where we are going, the kind of videos and the photographic testimonies of what has happened in Gaza will be with us forever. This has been one of the most widely recorded wars in, the most widely recorded war in modern history. And so, it's not going to go away, even if the war were to end tomorrow with the best possible, political solution, which is, of course, is not going to happen. But even if it were to happen, the political fallout of what Israel has done, I think will come back to haunt the country for a very long time. And I think the US is starting also to worry about how that will also affect the US itself. I mean, the unconditional support offered by the US to Israel in this war, I think they're starting to realize that it's been yet another complete strategic blunder. I mean, it's really hard to see how this benefits the US's national strategic interests in any way. This is simply gonna, I think what we're witnessing is the demise of the Western-led, of the US-led order that, kind of officially began in February of last year with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has really started the acceleration of the rise of this kind of post-Western order and the cementing of a new new political economic order of the global South, led by China. Now we're seeing that process, I think, being turbocharged by by the West's support for Israel's actions in Gaza. So again, this, it won't just be Israel that will suffer the long-term consequences from this, but it's the West. It's the Western bloc more in general. I think, which has, lost what few shreds of credibility and respect that it had in the eyes of the overwhelming majority of the global population. So I think the aside from the regional military implications, the wider global geopolitical implications of this war, I think, will be massive. And just as we saw in Ukraine, it's China and even Russia itself, in a way, that are benefiting the most from what is happening. China is now, they've literally handed China the occasion on a plate, the occasion to present itself as the only credible international peace broker in the region. I mean, that's a huge blunder on the US's behalf. On the one hand, you have the US supporting Israel's scorched earth strategy in Gaza, and on the other hand, you have China, which is the only major country that is trying to spearhead a diplomatic initiative to bring this war to an end. Of course, it's that there's very little chance of that happening, but the simple fact that the first serious summit for peace in the Middle East, with attendance, with diplomats from all the major Arab and Arabic and Muslim countries, was held in Beijing just a few days ago. It wasn't held in Washington; it was held in Beijing. So I think, again, this signals it and further consolidates this rise in political and geopolitical influence for China at the expense of the US and the West. And once again, it's been completely self-inflicted by the West. I mean, China has had to do nothing more than simply, sit back and look at, and watch the West and the US especially completely, further destroy their reputation in the eyes of the world. Quite astonishing.
Thomas, I was going to ask a few questions. You already answered them from your article. I just want to read this paragraph to the audience. This is from your article. Washington's support for Israel's is already compromising its reputation in the region, according to a diplomatic cable obtained by CNN earlier this month. American diplomats in Arab countries have warned the Biden administration that its robust support for Israel is losing us Arab publics for a generation, and is seen across large parts of the Middle East as material and moral culpability in what they consider to be possible war crimes. The Washington Post also recently reported, based on the statements of Arab leaders and analysts, that the U.S. support for Israel's actions risks lasting damage to Washington's standing in the region and beyond. I mean, the fact of the matter is the United States presented itself since the 70s as a mediator, and they were at some times honest. Kissinger was honest with Syria. The least to say, he was honest with his intentions, and he was honest with the limitations of the United States and what they can present to Syria if any peace agreement happens between Syria and Israel back then. But now the people cannot trust in the intentions of the United States, especially after this onslaught. I think the United States' reputation is also damaged beyond repair in the region. And this, as you argued, the Chinese and the Russians, they're playing very safe and very clever in this regard, and they're not like tricking the people in the region. They're just exploiting the mistakes of the United States to present themselves as an alternative and filling this vacuum. And because there are financial and economic projects in the region nowadays headed by MBS. MBS has his own economic vision for his country and for the region. And he struck a deal with the Iranians. The Emiratis, they have their own different vision. The Syrians, they want to reconstruct their country. I mean, the region can see there is also a financial shift is happening from the United States to the east, especially to China. And people want to achieve their first national and individual financial and economic interests, right? And this is an opportunity for these countries to pursue better relations with other countries that can fulfill these aspirations of these countries after decades of divide and conquer, selling weapons to Saddam Hussein and Iran at the same time, turning them against each other. I mean, it was quite obvious what was happening in the past.
Yeah.
And I think there is hope. I think there is hope now in the region with these different economic, let's say, projects that require these countries to head towards a bigger economic bloc that is emerging in the East. And because the financial and economic interests of China require stabilizing the region, that's how I see things. I'm not pro-Chinese or pro-Russian. I see that their interest is to stabilize the
I
region.
think that's pretty obvious. Yeah,
that's why I think it's I see a little bit hope now in the region. I'm very my heart hurts me when I see all this footage. But were it not for all the sacrifices that the Palestinians now did in the Gaza Strip, the world would not have waken up to their suffering. The world would not have spoken about their right to say to dignified life, and for at least the pursuit for peace in the region. And now, because of this bloodshed, the people were so shooken to the core, and they are all of a sudden speaking about the two-state solution. Saudi Arabia is reviving the Arab Initiative for the peace plan, etc., etc. So let's see how this will end up. Thomas, you are an author, also the co-author of the COVID consensus. Where can the audience find your book if they want to buy? I will screen. I think this is the publisher's website, right? Am I correct?
Yes, Hearst. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you can buy it on the publisher's website, if not on all major online outlets. It's available for shipping to almost anywhere. So quite easy to get a hold of.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. When this live streaming is over, guys, I will add this link to the book, The COVID Consensus, in the description below. The X account is already in the description, and the article that we discussed today is in the description below. I will also add this the COVID Consensus, the link to buy this COVID Consensus. You can read the description and see if you want to dig in and enlighten yourself more about this topic. And if you like, you can purchase it also online. But before that, I just want to thank you, Thomas, for your time. I know that you also have your family time now. I'm very grateful that you dedicated this time for me and for the audience of Syriana Analysis, who are very happy that you were present with us today. Guys, some of you were saying that I should contact the PBD podcast. By the way, he's Armenian, like myself, the owner of the PBD from Iran. I saw some of his videos recently about the Palestine, Israel, and the podcast he did. I think he was very unfair toward the Palestinians. I will, if there is a contact email or something that I can contact him, I will do it. But they don't host people online. They just get them to the United States to their podcast. I don't know how is that going to happen, especially that I'm coming from the position of a Syrian Christian of Armenian origins. They cannot accuse me of being pro-Hamas and Islamist or all these things.
Anti-Armenian.
Yeah. Armenian Salafist. I don't know what are they going to accuse me, but let's see. Let's see for that. And guys, thank you very much for watching. Yeah, that would be really interesting. Guys, thank you so much really for tuning in and watching this live streaming. And I will not be able to come tomorrow for a live stream. It's a family matter, and I will keep you posted when I can do it next Monday or next Tuesday. I just want to thank very, very quickly SR for his generous support. He says, thanks for doing what you do, work. You're appreciated. I really consider this like a duty for myself. Thomas, thank you so much, brother, for being with me, and I will see you very soon.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.